Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to, I guess, the first Odyssey of this season. I'm filling in for Beth Andes, who is normally the host, but she's off in Scandinavia, so for several weeks I'll be hosting. And the way this works is that the presenter in this case is Keith Miller, who happens to be my husband, but gets about 20 to 30 minutes to tell about their life story. After that, we will have a offering for a minute, and then people here will get the chance to ask questions, and there'll be dialogue. Um, this is going to be on recorded for YouTube. He signed the paper that allows that to be there. It's not, I don't think it's automatically put on YouTube, but you can request in the office or somewhere and hear it or hear any past Odysseys at that point if you're interested. So I think that's all I'm supposed to say. And since time is usually at an essence, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Keith to give his Odyssey.
Thank you. Keith's journey. For me, the tapestry woven by my life experiences reflect those found in nature as it cycles from life to death, then death to life. Times when I've experienced despair and brokenness reflected in winter, and times when I've found hope and joy, like the rebirth witnessed in spring, when the world once more comes alive in breathtaking colors. I was born in 41, the third child in a family of four boys raised on the central plains of Nebraska. My parents were from farming families of German and Swedish heritage. We were a typical American family in the 40s and 50s. I was in the sixth grade when we joined the American Lutheran Church in Glenville, a small community of 300 in south central Nebraska. My father worked as a diesel mechanic at a naval ammunition depot nearby. The pastor, a former gambler, was a plain spoken, rugged individual who captured our family's admiration. This minister became a mentor for me and encouraged my interest in ministry. In 1953, a time of turmoil and trauma for me, at the age of 12, I was already experiencing the early stages of puberty and all the confusion that goes with it. Troublesome for me because my physical attraction and admiration for men were becoming much stronger, in conflict with my growing interest in the church. It was this year that I came to know the reality of death. During the summers, I spent many weeks with my father's parents on their farm when I was alone with my grandfather cutting weeds near the horse tank. He fell over dead of a heart attack, a terrifying experience for a 12-year-old. My grandfather and I had shared many an evening lying on the cellar door, gazing at the stars in the cool Nebraska evening while he entertained me with tales of the old days. We also spent that summer attending the funerals of several of their friends. Death was not a natural progression in life, but something to fear. 54. This was an age when an elderly biology teacher in a small community of Glenville, originally from California, taught us about the wonderful gift of sex. This really impressed me because in a small community in Nebraska, you wouldn't necessarily hear the teacher talking about sex. I was impressed with the sheer beauty of her teaching, but confused because I was attracted to men. At this time, there was no thought given to homosexuality as a natural expression of our sexuality. The attraction I experienced when I saw the shirtless young men practicing basketball was exciting, but the innocence of that would be lost in guilt because the church and society taught me this was unnatural and wrong. In 1956, my junior year of high school, the Naval Ammunition Depot where my father worked closed, and he took a job at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas. My family transferred their church membership to the only Lutheran church in Burkburnett, a conservative Missouri Synod congregation. Not a good place for a young man who knew he was a homosexual. After high school graduation in '58, I began my preparation for the ministry at Concordia Junior College in Austin, continued to Concordia Senior College in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and then to Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri. These years were filled with serious study, interest in music, a failed attempt at a relationship with a girl, and a nagging awareness that I was not normal. You can't imagine the energy I spent with my guard up so that no one would suspect who I really was. Theological symbols of suffering, the cross, and the Missouri Synod's banner teaching, the natural depravity of man, became the mortar for the brick wall I constructed around myself. I remember a little psychological test I learned for determining your script in life. We were to list our favorite music, movie, story. Not surprising, these titles I chose showed a keen interest in the tragic. While at senior college in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I visited St. Augustine's house, a Lutheran monastery in Oxford, Michigan. The monk, Father Arthur Kreinhader, became a delightful friend and mentor for me. He helped me intellectually to appreciate post-resurrection themes of hope and joy. After completing a semester at the seminary in St. Louis, I fled to that monastery, motivated, I'm sure, by my suppressed sexuality and running away from a blossoming relationship with another girl. At the monastery, I loved the routine, the spirituality, the peace, rituals, and the physical work, but I did not have a vocation to celibacy. After a while, I returned to St. Louis and signed a contract as a lay assistant with a Black Lutheran urban church where I had worked as a seminarian. Large cities at that time were often up, caught up in a racial disturbances and riots. I spent most of the year serving as a chaplain at Homer G. Phillips Hospital, the city's black hospital across from our church. The chaplain had had a heart attack, and my church signed me there as part of their ministry. Uh, Later on, if you're interested, I could tell you many experiences from working in a city hospital and going into the emergency room. In '66, I married a former Roman Catholic nun with whom I had worked on neighborhood anti-poverty programs. We shared similar vocational interests, liked working with people, and loved kids. After teaching 10 years, she decided to leave the Sisters of the St. Joseph of Carondelet, but it was not until 2 months later that she would get her official papers of separation. The night we picked up her papers from the convent, we went to see The Sound of Music. Marriage? What was I thinking? There are no models for any other direction. Homosexuality was wrong, and a relationship of that was unacceptable. Besides, with God, wasn't anything supposedly possible? Billy, my wife, and I were idealists. We lived for 3 years in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and worked in a large old German Roman Catholic urban parish where we taught in a Black parochial school, and I directed the music program in the parish. These were exciting days. In the Roman Catholic Church, experimentation was the rule in a post-Vatican II parish, and our school reached out to many children who had been rejected in the public school system. We had 2 children, Sean and Maria. The bishop had heard of my background and asked if I wanted to become a married diaconate. Instead, we decided to go to Hammer School of Theology, a Lutheran Church in America seminary on the Wittenberg University campus in Springfield, Ohio. This branch of Lutheranism was the most liberal in America. The school was experimental, offering the usual 4 years of academic study, intense small group interaction and reflection, integrated with 4 internships in varying fields. One of these internships, a mental health clinic, was a wonderful yet devastating experience for me. My docent observed that I appeared to be correct in my interaction with patients, but that I seemed to hold back from people's pain, that my feelings seemed to be hidden. My brick wall offered me protection from my feelings and closed out the feelings of others. When I handed him a written interaction between myself and the patient, he took a pen, scratched a large red F across the paper, and watched for my reaction. My world fell apart. I broke down, asked to see him privately, and admitted to him my sexuality. This began an opening in my very being that would slowly grow over the next 6 years. My seminary years, 69 through 72, were years of upheaval in our country, war protests, Kent State, less than 60 miles away from us, and Stonewall, the gay riot on Christopher Street in Greenwich Village. At this point, my seminary studies embraced an emerging interest in post-resurrection experience called theology of hope. This developing theology evolved out of the concentration camps in Nazi Germany, where priests, minister, and laymen of various religious communities were forced to dialogue and search for answers in a world seemingly gone mad. In short, they said that the message of the gospel was not the cross, with people waiting for the hereafter, but post resurrection themes, inviting people to recognize the kingdom of God already present, and thus for them to begin taking responsibility to work towards greater wholeness and quality lives now. I began to examine new theological symbols for ministry, focusing on hope and wholeness. I honed in on a portion of the Bible that gave me the most trouble, the Gospel of John. I found it remote, promising hope in the hereafter, but now a call to be responsible for living a quality living now, not to be handed to us after we die. Eternal life that was to come and yet promised now in the pursuit of a quality living, a term given more meaning as seen in the person of Jesus and his relationship to people, as he encouraged them to more complete and whole lives. It is helpful and important to understand that this particular gospel was written by a community of people years after Jesus died, wrestling with their contemporary issues. Jesus died, I'm sorry, Jesus did not return quickly as the other gospels foretold. This community had been thrown out of the synagogues now, their security, their very roots. They spoke with a new sense of freedom, though, through words they put in Jesus' mouth. The Spirit, this is John 16 through 12, the Spirit will lead you, will tell you of things to come. This was an openness and freedom for people to search for new meanings in their present experiences. This person, Jesus, had railed against those who called him a miracle worker. Instead, this community attributed these words to his life giver, bread of life, light, living waters, the way, logos, words describing movement, newness, sustenance, process, change. In 1972, I was ordained. My first pastorate was to reopen a vacant Lutheran church in Fort Worth, Texas, in the Poly area, and begin a new parish in a neighborhood that was now all Black. My 3 years there, by all outward appearances, were successful. A growing worship community, youth groups, a thrift shop, summer lunch programs, and a funded vocational programs for teenagers. And yet, I felt like a failure and experienced depression. My body was screaming for me to get on with dealing with my sexuality. And instead, I sought a change in work settings. We had a third child. I accepted a new parish, Children's Memorial Lutheran Church in Northeast Kansas City in 1974. It was an older church served by the same minister for 39 years. Its membership consisted of senior citizens whose stated goal was to reach out to their community. I was enjoy stroking and enabling them to find new areas of service and was feeling better about myself because I had started counseling. But after a year, the bottom fell out because I had gone too far. I had begun to love myself too much. If I permitted myself to be okay, then I would lose my ministry, my vocation, my children, and my friend, my wife. Denial was no longer an option. It was already immeasurably causing immeasurable hurt and damage to my children, my wife, and me. I got drunk, attempted suicide, and after a hospitalization and treatment, decided that for me to become whole, I needed to come out, get a divorce, and sometime begin a new partnership. All of this was more or less fine for the bishop, except the part about a new partner. If I were intent upon living with a man, I would need to resign from the ministry. I was not interested in celibacy, nor in dealing with my sexuality on the side, in secret, on the down low. I worked with a psychiatrist for a year. It was a slow birth process. Much of what I had taught others about seeking wholeness within their lives, which had a long lasting quality, took on personal meaning. The year was 1976. When my wife and I divorced, I took custody of our boys, and she took custody of our daughter. After a 3 year relationship with a younger man, I sought out Morse, whom I had dated when I first came out in 76. At that time, he wasn't ready to settle down. I told him he was passing up a good thing, but it took him 3 years to realize it. I worked 3 years as a medical social worker at Truman Medical Center, the city hospital, and moved on to be a nursing home administrator. In 81, 40 years old, midlife crisis, so to speak, Morris, the two boys, and I moved to Union, South Carolina. We were resettled in his grandparents' vacated home, 1850 farmhouse. We joined and were very active in the Episcopal Church in Union. There was 37% unemployment in Union. I worked at the county library and was asked by the state library to coordinate a fund drive to build a $450,000 addition to the library. People more or less looked the other way concerning our relationship, and for a small southern town, we felt ourselves pretty well accepted. After 3 years, Morse was laid off from his job as a printer, and we decided to move to Fort Worth, Texas in 84. By the way, the funds for the Carnegie Library had been raised. In Fort Worth, I worked at the city library for 17 years until my retirement in January 2003. During my employment there, I was always out and asked by the director to be representative on the city's Commission on Diversity, promoting acceptance and diversity in the workplace. except, that is, for gays. I helped write a proposal for the Librarians Association to the city, requesting equal benefits for domestic partners. It was easy to be out at the library, but it always caused me a great deal of anxiety and pain, not with being out, being an advocate at City Hall and the Diversity Commission, which would not accept. While the proposal was not accepted, it did provide support later for other LGBTQ workers at the library and in the city that had their proposal accepted. My family, for the most part, accepted Morris and me as a couple. When my fundamentalist brother's son was to be married in Dallas, everyone was invited except Morris and me. Our invitation came after my family told my brother that either Morris and Keith are invited or no one is going. By the way, when we got to the wedding, at the reception, there was a beautiful cake there, and her brother came over and told us that he had baked the cake and was so glad to see us. Morris and I became active members of St. Matthew's Lutheran. We helped that church become a welcoming congregation and establish a local chapter of Lutherans Concerned, an LGBTQ organization within the Evangelical Lutheran Church. I became a member of the National Board of Directors for Lutherans Concerned. We attended 2 district conventions and 2 national church conventions, where we attempted to dialogue with the church on its official stand, which said, "We love you, but you can't become ministers or marry your spouse within the church." Morris and I also worked in a local pantry for AIDS services and were caregivers for 7 people living with AIDS. At that time, of course, AIDS was a death sentence. It was evident to us that the Lutheran Church, which had been looking at and studying homosexuality for over 30 years, was no closer to opening its doors to us than when it made its first study in the 70s. By the way, the Quakers made their first study in the 50s and became fully accepting of gays and lesbians in their church. We decided to seek out a more inclusive spiritual community in 92. We had considered the MCC Church, that's the Metropolitan Community Church, and the United Church of Christ, but realized that our coming out must be reflected in our spirituality and not be made at the exclusion of others who have a different spiritual journey. We were both evolving humanists, so the Unitarians fit our interest, and First Jefferson UU in Fort Worth became our home. Craig Rosshaven, the minister, was politically active in the city on behalf of the LGBTQ community. In 99, my father suffered 2 strokes and needed to use a wheelchair much of the time. It became clear that my mother could no longer care for him. She refused to let him go into a nursing home unless she went with him. Our family adored my mother, but my father had molested my daughter and my brother's daughter in the late 70s. The pain and the scars that were left on our family were never to heal. This is really before um, knowledge became much more widespread about this problem. My father was watched not to be left with any of the smaller children, and in the case of some family members, never visited for some time. Because of the circumstances, we know that Mom never knew at the time the molestations occurred. Out of the compassion for my mother, my daughter suggested that Morris and I move them in to live with us. She visited us, that is, my daughter, frequently, and it was a joy for my mother. My father suffered from dementia. In 2001, we lost my younger brother, Paige, to melanoma. In June, my father died in September, and my mother in October, and 2 years prior, my oldest brother to alcoholism. My brother Gary, the fundamentalist Christian who had trouble accepting our relationship, came around and was supporting for us, caring for dad and mom. When he and his wife visited, they accepted our invitation to stay at our house. Mom told us not long before she died, you know, Gary accepts the fact that you are gay, but cannot accept that you became Unitarian. When Morris and I lived in Kansas City in the 70s, a group of us ex-seminarians and ex-ministers used to meet regularly. Part of our discipline was to share our developing theological views. The words I wrote at that time still feel right with me as I learn to stretch and affirm my Christian past and as I continue to embrace humanism fully. Many scholars believe the correct translation of Yahweh is not the traditional I am who I am, but I will be who I will be. God is not my tomorrow, little g. God is my future, my promises yet fulfilled, my taste for something more, my craving to move on. Sometimes even the ache, the pain, yes, even the hurt that pushes me forward to seek new answers, to make my life more whole. The word for sin in the Bible means simply missing the mark. It tells us that it's time to move on, recognize our errors, seek new answers, become more open to the future and new possibilities. That small g God has been around a long time. That God was the future for other people's lives, a future that pushed, confronted, and pulled their lives into seeing how they might have missed the mark. But what about the person Jesus? Not the Christ for me, not a savior. He was a wonderful teacher and prophet. He crossed so many boundaries that were sacred, treating women as equals, ignoring status, acting when he knew his interactions would help individuals become more whole, even when it was sacrilegious to do so. What about heaven and hell? We have plenty right here. For me, the closest you get to a hereafter is that we continue to live on and those lives we touched and had the privilege to know.
At this point, our practices take a minute of relaxation and also pass the offering basket. Now, I failed to find out where the offering basket is. George, you're not here, are you? They said George Babbitt would pass the offering.
In the meantime, there are pictures there over there on the poster board that are about my life as it continued.
Yes, if you want to take a minute break, if you want to look at the pictures, uh, Carol's going to pass the basket around, and then we'll have a period of questions and answers and discussion with Keith. Yeah, so well, I'll tell you what, let's get started. They can finish looking at the pictures. And what we'll do is have a time where we can dialogue with Keith about his life and what he's thinking. It's important that if you do have a question, let me know and I'll bring the microphone since this is being recorded. Also, I'll take this point to say that next week, Bill Ramey is going to be the presenter. And then the 15th, Ginger here is going to be the presenter. The 22nd, and Jonathan Armstrong. 19th, Devin Armstrong. Rayanne Nixon is going to do it on the July 6th, and Kathleen Forster on July 13th. There's a couple of open spots too if anybody wants to volunteer. But right now, if you have questions, just hold up your hand and I'll give you the microphone or the report.
Um, I remember when you were here in Kansas City and then left and went back to Texas. Can you talk about that, why you made that change and
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Why we went to Texas.
why you went back to Texas after you've been in Kansas City?
Oh, yes. My daughter-in-law, uh, my youngest son and daughter-in-law lived in Texas, and my daughter-in-law had a stroke, and the children, her children at that time were preschool. One was preschool, one was just beginning school. So overnight, we packed up and went down there to take care of the children. And then we were down there for 10 years helping them. And and we still wanted to come back because our retirement and well, I had another daughter and son living here in Kansas City and wanted to come back here.
Another question?
Well, first, thank you. And I hope that your written comments are available because I'd like to share them with my beloved spousal unit Fletcher's Lutheran relatives. But what I'd like to ask you is how devastating did you feel the Missouri Synod situation was to you personally?
Tremendously so. Yeah. Uh, the Lutheran Church as a whole was quasi accepting, but Missouri Synod, with their theology, which is I consider very, very dark, and Missouri Synod had gone through a period of liberalizing over the years and was headed that direction, and there was a swift reaction. And after I left seminary, there was a revolt and a good portion of the seminary left with the professors and became a seminary in exile. They later joined other liberal churches and became a larger evangelical Lutheran church in America. By the way, I should speak and say that that church that I belonged to in the end did eventually accept gays and lesbians, ordains them, blesses their marriages, and yeah, fully accepts.
Someone else? Right here.
I grew up Missouri Synod Lutheran, and when I came to Kansas City, me and my sister and other went to your church, the Children's Memorial. Is that what it was? We went to that one. I think you're the guy who preceded you was there at that time. But anyhow, I was told. I wrote a letter to the Missouri Senate when in my hometown, Mound City, and anyhow, he replied with a letter that said, or change membership. He replied and said that I was going to hell if and this guy wasn't real bright. And anyhow, that was one of the things that caused me to give up religion because he said if he could, we should change our membership.
Yeah. They do not transfer membership to other Lutheran churches. Yeah.
Someone else? Yes.
So I've worked quite a few of these, and I feel like I've noticed as a theme a lot of older queer people who grew up religious really moved into the religion even more and were really into it and often even sought careers in it. And I was just curious if you had thoughts on that in general.
Long, long, long process. Yeah. Um, I have good feelings about my home church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. It's yeah, it's very open. It took quite a while for them to go to that point, but there are several denominations that are having still difficulty with that. The Methodist Church, Presbyterian Church, United Church of Christ preceded many of them. That is, there's two United Church of Christ, but the broader liberal United Church of Christ, and have accepted gays and lesbians for some time. And of course, then I pointed out that the Quakers had done that study in the 50s and have been accepting of and been very open to gays and lesbians for many, many years. It's very, very difficult for some people.
Anybody else? Well, I think we are finished a little bit early, but we got some time to relax. Yes, here.
I have a comment. Is that okay? Sure. Yeah, I was really interested in your toward the end. You talked about a small G God, and that brought to mind that where I've ended up is that I had a Christian background like many of us, but that I'm now a small C Christian, and I explained that he's a great philosopher and all that, of the same category really as Buddha and a few others that understood the basic issues in humanity between good and evil. So, anyway, I appreciate that part of it.
Yeah, for I'm just simply saying that as long as we humans have a future, there's possibilities. And for me, possibilities and what we do with them is our grace, is the possible, that there's hope. Um, I hope we realize that in our world right now, it's a little bit difficult to be hopeful, but that's supposedly the Christian message is uh, that we still have a future, you know, and the future, I think, as Christians, is supposed to be here, not hereafter. That's a misconception, I think. It was interpreted for that period of time, the myth.
I recently read an article about Christianity and some of the people who study it, and they said that it was definitely a copy of Greek theology. And at one point, they questioned whether Jesus ever actually existed.
Yeah, there are people, yeah, who question.
Further questions or discussion? All right. Well,
Wait,
okay.
How did you and your ex-wife balance your parenting after you separated?
we co-parented. Um, um, I'm surprised I haven't had a question like, "How did you get custody of the boys?" And it's almost when you're in the midst of a divorce, things get real muddled and unclear. And it was extremely difficult, very, very, very horrible. And we sat down with the children and told them that we were parting, and we hadn't decided about the children. Um, by the way, I'll speak to another issue that brings up. Um, and my son said, and I said, we have to decide the children where you go, but explaining that they would have equal share coming back and forth. And my son, eldest son, popped up and said he wanted to go with me. And he says, but I won't go without my little brother. And the little one was a year and a half year old at the time. And then my daughter l- later told me that out of guilt, she said she wanted to go with her mother. Now, let me explain a little bit our roles in life. Uh, my ex was very much a professional woman. You know, parenting was much later in her life. She was 10 years older than I was. So she was after 30 to have her first child. And while she really loved children, she always had a career all the way through, through her life. And uh, in a sense, if you want to say in a partnership, which one is the mothering figure? I was much more of a mothering figure than my ex. She was a sweet, loving person, but as far as the role of real parenting, it was myself that did that. My children all talk about that. Later on, when we moved back to Kansas City here, uh, uh, we would have weekly dinners for my children and their wives, and so that the wives could have a little bit of relaxation. Well, the husband and wife, and uh, on Mondays, and my ex was always invited. Uh, yeah, so that's, but it was. Oh yes, oh yeah, yeah. We were very, very close at the end. She was particularly very close to Morris, and yeah, yeah. She was a beautiful person. She really was a wonderful person. During those years of divorce, it was very difficult, and many things were said and done at that time that you always regret. But I can honestly say she was quite a lovely person. She really was. Yeah.
I may say something. Of course, I was there, and I always really liked Billy, and our meetings every week to eat and so forth. Keith was a great cook and cooked big meals for the whole family. But anyway, uh, she was a lovely person, and we just always had a real. They had a real close relationship after they went through all the initial stuff. So for years, we were very much together in a lot of ways.
Um, there was a time when the boys went to live with their mother. Uh, Probably not. It was they had she had had them for the summer, and they came down to Texas, and to she was bringing the boys back, and uh, we got into it because she let my son drive, and he was just 15 years of age, and he had a permit. And I said, please don't do that on the way home. And she told me she would do what she wanted to. And I said, you know, I have custody of him. And if you're in an accident, you know, they can take everything we own, both of us. And I said, you know, it just don't, please do it. And she got very angry and got up and left. And the two boys got up and left with her. And I didn't see them then for a couple of years. And then I got a call from elementary school up here. My youngest son was coming to school uh, riding his bicycle in the snow, and she was very concerned about him. And she said she kept trying to get a hold of the mother, but hadn't been able to get a hold of the mother, and was very worried. And then I got a call from my daughter saying, wasn't I coming to the graduation? And I said I hadn't received an invitation. So I had had no communication up to that time. And then so I said, we'll be there, and got up there. And my daughter and I talked about it later. And she said she did uh, give them to her mother to mail. Now, I don't know, you know, that happens, you know, in relationships. And then my two sons at that point uh, came back and stayed with us for the summer. Now, my oldest son by this time was quite rebellious, and I gave him structure, and he didn't like it. And so he went back and was with his mother, and joined a gang. And in fact, then had uh, uh, another gang was putting out an order for him. And so his mother called me, and he came down to live with me again for a while, and couldn't stand the structure, and just left. And he had straightened himself out through quite a long period, and has really grown a wonderful father and young man, and um, uh, straighten his life out. But he looks back at those years and he said, yeah, he did a lot of things. Uh, would he went back to his mom because his mom was easy on him. She was easy on him. Yeah, yeah. Didn't want had difficulty providing structure. Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? Got about 5 more minutes before we're supposed to uh, adjourn. Well, good. Spend a few minutes if you haven't looked at his pictures, and thank you for coming. And remember, every Sunday morning through the summer, we'll be having these Odysseys. I might say, just to brag on myself, when I was we were in Texas and went to the UU church there. I was volunteered to be the adult religious um, um, person there. And one thing that I adopted immediately when at Westside was the Odysseys. We had the 2 years, well, for several years there, we had Odysseys there. We also had a religious book club, which we used to have here, and several things that I was proud to import from also to that church. Thank you very much.